main data types and data structures that you can use in Python, we will start talking about other very important topics and fundamentals in programming, particularly conditionals, loops, and functions. So let's start with conditionals. A conditional is a structure in programming that lets you define what should happen in your program based on whether a condition is true or false. So if the condition is true, you can do something, but if it's false, you can do something entirely different if you need to. That kind of logic that you add to your program is very powerful, because you can create programs that depend on the particular value of a variable. Let's see an example. Let's define a variable called score. We're developing a video game, and we have a variable called score. If the score when the player ends the game is greater than 80, then we are going to print congratulations, you won. Okay, but if the score is not greater than 80, then we will not print anything. And here we have several different concepts combined, and something entirely new that we haven't seen so far, at least not formally. Indentation. In an if statement, we write the keyword if followed by the condition. This is the condition that Python will evaluate to determine if this particular line of code should be executed. We can have multiple lines here below print. If this condition is true, this code will run. But if it's false, then the code will not run. This is when the power of Boolean values and comparison operators starts to come into play to combine and create powerful programs. We have the operator, we have truth values, we have expressions, and we have functions, all combined. And we also have something new. We have a colon right here at the end of the first line, and we have 4 spaces before the line, before print. The colon at the end of the first line is required in Python when you write compound statements. Compound statements have a header, which is like the first line where you set up everything, and then they have a body. The body, in this case, will only run if the condition is true. And the body of the conditional has to be indented. In Python, we indent the code with 4 spaces per level. If we write it like this, we will see an error, because the line will not be considered as part of the conditional. We have to add 4 spaces for the error to go away. That is what we call indentation, and in Python, indentation is required. It's not just for style or for readability. It is functionally required to run your program and to write it correctly. Okay, so let's save our file and let's run our code and see how it works. We don't see any output. Why? Because the condition was false. The value of score is 56, so when we reach this line, the score is not greater than 80. So this condition is false. This code never runs. Now let's change this to 94, for example. Now we see congratulations, you won, because the value of score when we reach this line was greater than 80. Awesome, that's basically the logic of an if statement. This is what we call the conditional with this particular syntax, an if statement. We can also have other types of conditionals. So let's say, for example, let's define a variable and we can check if the name is equal to Gino. If that is the case, we will say hi Gino. In this case, since this condition was true, the 2 strings were equal, then we can say hi Gino. But if the name is Nora, then we don't see any output because this line never runs. That is the most basic form of an if statement. We can also add another clause called else. Let's see. Right now we're telling the program what should happen if the condition is true. But we also have the power to tell the program what happens if the condition is false. And that is what we do when we write else. You can see how we are expanding the conditional gradually. When we add the else clause, we are saying if this condition is true, then run this code. Else, if the condition is false, then run this code. We can have multiple lines inside the body of if and inside the body of else, okay? We don't have to write just one line. It can be as complex as we need to. This is just to illustrate the logic of how this works. So let's see how it works now that we know that the name is not Gina. Previously we saw no output. Let's run the program, and now we see this. Hey, your name is not Gina. So this code runs because this condition was false. That's basically the logic of the if-else statement. If this condition is true, run this code, else if it was false, then run this code. And that is very powerful. And you can also expand it even further with an elif clause. The elif clause lets you test multiple conditions. Let's see this. Let's define the variable x equal to 6. And let's say if the value of x is greater than 3, then we are going to print hello world. Elif the value of x is greater than 0 but less than 3, then we're going to print Python is awesome. Else, we're going to print have an awesome day. So we're giving the program 3 different options of what it should do based on these conditions. If x is greater than 3, then it should print this message. Else, if it's not greater than 3, but if it is greater than 0, then we print this message. Else, if these 2 conditions were false, then have an awesome day. Let's see what we get with the value 6. We see hello world, because x is greater than 3, it's 6 right now. Now let's choose the value 2. Now we see Python is awesome. Why? Because x was not greater than 3, so this condition was false. Python checked the second condition. Now this was true because x was greater than 0, and this code was executed. And now let's have a negative number, so neither one of these conditions will be true. Now we see have an awesome day. Because the value was not greater than 3, it was not greater than 0, so we went to the backup clause, which is else. If none of the previous conditions were true, then we go to else and we run this code. That is basically the logic of a conditional, okay? And you can have as many elif clauses as you need to, but there are certain rules. The if statement has to be at the very top of this sequence. This is the first keyword that you should have in a conditional. Then the elif clauses should be in the middle. And then if you need to, you can write an else clause. It is not mandatory, you don't have to write the else clause all the time. But if you need to, it has to be at the end. Okay, so these are just some basic rules. Now you know how to work with conditionals. Next, we're going to talk about loops. Loops are also very important because they let us repeat code blocks in our program. So, let's continue.